Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for spending some time with us on your Thursday. We are here talking with Daniel Rockwell, who I'll introduce in a minute, about some work that he's doing at Arizona State University to leverage inscribed virtual communities to help improve success rates, particularly around their online and early math courses. So very excited about that topic. I know it's something a lot of us are thinking about and have always been thinking about. So I'm excited to share the story of the work that ASU is doing today. We're both really interested. We're joined also today by Daniel Bonner, who is my colleague and is going to help facilitate the conversation. So as you have questions, please post them in the chat area. Danielle will keep an eye on that. She is always empowered to interrupt us at any point and let us know what questions come in, because we do want to make this conversational and interactive. And so we'll try to take your questions and comments along the way as we do, as we work through the presentation. So feel free to use that area. And we also would love to know who you are and what brings you here today. So if you have a minute to just introduce yourself, great to know kind of who you are, what organization, institution you're from, what your role is there. And I always like to say, if there's something really specific that brought you here today that you're wanting to make sure that you get out of this session, please let us know, because we can make sure that we touch on that. If it's not part of the sort of standard presentation that we have, we'll make sure that we veer off and talk about that as well. So definitely bring that in. So I mentioned I'm Katie Kapler. I am the co-founder and CEO of Inscribe. If you're not familiar with Inscribe, we're a virtual community platform. We wrap around content and curriculum at an institution to create flexible on-demand spaces for students to connect with peers, faculty, and staff so they can get the help they need when they need it. We do a lot of work in the academic area, which is what we're going to talk with Daniel about today. Speaking of which, I am joined today by Dr. Daniel Rockwell, who is the Assistant Director of Online Mathematics for Arizona State University. Dr. Rockwell holds a doctorate in mathematics from Oregon State University and is a passionate educator and mathematician whose goal is to transform how higher ed teaches mathematics in order to make it more inclusive and approachable for all learners. When Dr. Rockwell is not busy working and impressing people with his math skills, you can find him on the disc golf course, throwing plastic at chains or at home playing with their kids. So Daniel, welcome to the conversation today. I had to pause because I'm not a disc golfer. Like, am I reading this correctly? Probably.
I was wondering what was happening there. You throw the disc at the chains.
You throw it into chains. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Katie and Danielle.
So, and at the end, if you have questions about disc golf, we'll go into that separately. So thank you so much for joining us, Daniel. It's awesome to have you here. And I should say, we've been working together for a couple of years now. Daniel has been a real innovator in the work that's going on at ASU and always brings such interesting insights to the table. So love working with you, and I'm excited to share your story today.
Thank you.
So let's jump into it. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about Arizona State University? I doubt there's anybody on this meeting that doesn't know ASU, but if you want to just give a quick overview of the institution, and then we can kind of dig into the core of the content.
Sure. Arizona State University is a large university, if you're not familiar with that part of it. There's this phrase that gets used, it's being talked about as the new American university. So there's some new models being tried for how to engage in the learning space in different ways at different sort of scales. And one is a worldwide scale. And then there's, more of the traditional scale of like students in classrooms. And one of the things that was shocking to me when I joined ASU a few years ago was the large number of students in the online program. So there's somewhere around 54,000 students taking courses online at ASU, and that kind of scale and impact for improvement was really interesting to me and compelled me to want to work there.
Awesome. Yes. And I love one of the things that we love about Arizona State has been also its inclusive nature, right? Like, what can we do to welcome everyone into the program when a lot of institutions, I think, are becoming more exclusive, really welcoming people in and having them be more inclusive to the process. So speaking of which, one of the ways that we know it can be, one of the things we know that can be a stumbling block for a lot of students as they embark on a post-secondary degree is math, especially when they run into math in their first year courses. So why don't we talk a little bit about how that was playing out at ASU and ASU Online, and what your observations were?
Yeah, so some of the challenges that we had were students not feeling connected with the course and with each other and with the faculty. And we wanted to find a way to get students to connect. And there's a large number of students, so it should be possible for them to find people that they can identify with and connect with because of the scale that we have. So trying to not look at the large number of students as a negative, but how do we leverage the positive out of having a large group of students? And so one of the things that we needed to do was find a way to get all of our students into a communal discussion space for a given course. So instead of the discussion spaces being separated by each section, all the sections and all the students of, say, a course like college mathematics, they would all be put into one discussion space. This made it, this had both, challenges and opportunities. The opportunities are the students get to talk to all of the other students. They get to see the questions that every student is having and feel not alone, that they're the only one struggling, that they're the only one that has that confusion, that there are others that are in the same place. And the other really uplifting thing that I've seen is one student posting to the other students, hey, you can do this. This is tough. I got through it this week. You can too. That's now a comment to all of the students and not just the other 100 students in the class, but all of the other students. And depending on the class, that could be somewhere from like 3,000 to 1,000 students when you comprise all the sections. So having all of that communication centralized allows people to identify with each other, as well as when we share things and to help people be uplifted, it gets to everyone. Some of the challenges were shifting the culture for the people doing the teaching team, as I like to call it. This was not the standard approach. So there were things that had to be figured out and learned and adjusted to in order to communicate with a broader community versus just the students in your own course.
Right. So you had like the starting place for you guys was a more traditional model, many course sections. I think we even have, a huge number of students, a huge number of sections, a lot of students per section. And then each faculty member, probably had a TA, but having to manage communication within that space. So I think what I heard you say is like, not only is that challenging for the faculty member trying to manage communication with such a large number of students, but it feels sort of impersonalized that student isn't connecting very well with the faculty. They're not necessarily connecting well with each other. And then what's your perspective? That connection between the student and the faculty and the student and the other is really important because, that sense of not being alone and not being the only one that doesn't understand. And so do you feel like students were coming in maybe with, I think the term people use a lot of times, like imposter syndrome, or, I can't get this. I'm not a math person, so to speak. Did you feel like you were seeing a lot of that in the students that were coming in at ASU?
Yeah, definitely. That's a thing that I think we'll see in almost all math students as they come into especially introductory math courses, is that there's an emotional and psychological aspect to the students engaging with math courses and helping them create a growth mindset, helping them find strategies to feel like they are capable and that they aren't in a place where they're just stuck being incapable. Mm-hmm. That's definitely a trend that we see in students, and we can start to change that in the way that we help them, in the way that we communicate with them, and the way that we help them see that progress can be made, and that progress is incremental and doesn't, you don't normally take giant leaps forward, but that you make progress little bits at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll touch on a few of these things that are related, but I'll pause and just see, Danielle, anything, since I
We
can't.
did have a question just come into the chat. So what tools did you develop for students to group together around specific needs? For example, math anxiety or future STEM careers.
Awesome. I'm going to table that question for 1 second because we were just going to get sort of the design that ASU went into on, I think, in like 2 slides. So I want to dig into that more deeply. But I also want to kind of touch on that. A lot of the things that Daniel was talking about, I don't think are unique to online students, right? Like that math anxiety, that imposter syndrome, that, sense of isolation exists with in-person students as well. But I do think one of the unique things in online is when class is over and you're feeling that way, you just close your computer and you just are sitting alone feeling that way. Versus if you're in a classroom and class ends and you're feeling that way, you can turn to your friend next to you and be like, did that make any sense to you? And they're like, no, that didn't make any sense to me either. You sort of get that natural ability to share some of that amongst each other. And I wonder, I know one of the things ASU was seeing was that there was this difference between the success rates on campus and online. And I'm curious if that's what you think was contributing to that, or if you think there are other things going into that.
Well, I think there's probably some of that difference is because of the not having that impromptu conversation that you would find in person. And some of it is maybe the type of student that's drawn to the online course in the first place. And we're seeing that change. We're seeing the demographics of who's wanting to take online courses change very quickly, like from semester to semester, it's changing pretty rapidly.
That makes sense. Yes, and I probably since COVID too, there's the demographic of that population has started to shift to be maybe a broader set of people who are thinking about online as an option, either wholly, or I'm an on-campus student and I'm going to take some of my classes online, which I think that hybrid model is very common. It was common before, but it's even more common today, for example. So, some of the things you talked about, which we have here, how do we raise the success rates for those online students? How do we increase the active learning component of what they're doing? Maybe not in a way that's assigning them active learning activities, but creating spaces where they can engage with each other and start to think about and apply the knowledge that they're getting. And how do we do all that at the same time, make this a little more manageable for our faculty? Because when you're talking about thousands and thousands of students, the faculty member just simply doesn't have time to have a one-on-one conversation with each student each week. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the design that Arizona State came up with in terms of how you thought about modifying that support model. And you started to touch on that earlier, but let's go a little deeper into, what this new model of support really looked like.
Yeah, so we, instead of having like a separate teaching assistant for each section of a course or for each teacher of a course, we hired students to be learning assistants, and they worked as helpers in a large community where they would access all 5 courses that were previously mentioned. So the learning assistants would be interacting with students across all of those courses. And so they could be answering questions. They could be sharing the resources that are in the inscribed communities. And the really neat thing was how Inscribe was able to link up with some of the learning platforms like Alex and Canvas, so that right when a student is working on a question, they can ask a question about when a student is working on an exercise in Alex, they can ask a question in Inscribe about that. And that created a very easy to use aspect where the students didn't have a lot of laborious actions they had to take in order to instigate the asking for help. So it removes the barriers of making it problematic or time consuming or challenging for a student to ask a question, because the question in Alex, for instance, would be captured. So the student didn't need to take the time to figure out how to get the learning assistant to see the question they have. That was much more streamlined. And so that's the overview of what it sort of was like. And could we go to the next slide?
Yep.
And so I like the visual here of how this was working. Is you have a student who's working and they get a question, and so they post it to Inscribe. And then in Inscribe for that course, there's a learning assistant, there's also the faculty, and there's also potentially a teaching assistant or instructional aide that's also a member of that community. So there's a lot of potential for a person to be looking at Inscribe right then. So there's probably someone who's a part of the teaching team who's paying attention to Inscribe during that moment. And the student can get quite quick, I wouldn't say instantaneous, but quite timely response to their question. And then those questions and answers persist, which is the bunch of green check marks. Is now students don't always have to wait for an answer. The answer might already be there, and they'll be clued into that there's already been an answer provided to the question that they have. And so as we use the platform, it increases the quickness of response or the quickness of time between student being confused and student resolving the confusion on their own, which is one of the things that I'll talk about, Jeremy, about math anxiety. This is probably a good moment for it. One of the things that I've seen with math anxiety and changing math anxiety is getting students to engage in metacognitive aspects, metacognitive work in the course. One way that we've done that and captured data from students is using a post-exam reflection called an exam wrapper. And what I've seen in the data that we get there is students start to say things like, I feel more confident about taking the next exam. And that, like, it gives me shivers right now, because that's the thing. That's the change in the headspace of a student that we need to be working on, is that a student does feel like they're more capable in the future, and that it is about small incremental steps and not some flipping of a switch of now I'm a math person. We're all math people. We're just at different stages of our skill level, just like everyone could potentially play in the World Cup. Well, no, but we could all play football, right? We may not all be World Cup athletes.
That's a great point. And so I think the three things that you guys did really well here, one was this idea of bringing the sections together in a shared community, which I know you touched on was a change management process. And so not every institution that we work with does that. Sometimes the communities are tied to an individual course section, but the benefit that you get from that was it allows you to pull your teaching assistants. So now they're more efficient in their work. Once a question is answered once, it benefits every student across every section. So you're amplifying the benefit of that kind of scale model. And as a student who's maybe feeling anxious, you're more likely to find another student who's in the same position as you or feeling the same anxiety as you when you have access to a broader pool of people. So it's not necessarily required to get those benefits, but you really, I think, amplified the benefits by bringing all those sections together. And then I love that you touched on the Alex piece. I don't think we have a slide specific to that, but just to give everyone like a level deeper. If you're not familiar with Alex, it's the math product from McGraw-Hill. So it's like the courseware, the practiceware that students are using when they're practicing their math skills. So when a student got stuck, they could access Inscribe from the LMS, but they could also access it directly from Alex. So while I'm practicing and I'm like, oh, I don't understand this, one-click access to launch into their ASU math community directly from there. And that proximity is really important because students don't like to have to go hunt things down. They want easy access, simple access. And so that really helps drive the participation, I think. Looks like there's some stuff going on in the chat.
Yes,
Danielle,
can we pause? There's a couple of questions coming in. The first one was, can you remind us how many students are in this model? And I went back to a previous slide. It sounds like there's a greater than 16,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, over the year, like that's a spring, summer, fall for those 5 math courses.
Okay, and then how often do you see questions that are unintentionally course section specific? And how do you manage that in context of the shared community?
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great question. And that's something that we addressed pretty quickly with creating a separate, I'm going to forget the exact word, but let's call it channel, I think is the right word.
Nailed it.
And yes, good. And so there's like a channel that is for each instructor and a channel that's for the study hall is what we call it. And so if there's a question about like a due date or something that's more specific to that instructor, the students they learn over time, but there's a little bit of onboarding sort of description of what each channel is for. And so the students have a separate place to ask those like course specific things versus the like math content kind of question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
The next question we have is in regards to FERPA. So we have students taking the same course all in one community. Does that cross some lines with FERPA?
As far as I'm aware, it does not.
No, and so there's also things that are done in the Inscribe platform in terms of obscuring student names. Their identity is not readily visible to the other members of the community unless they choose to make their profile visible. So there's a lot of sort of opt-in behavior. Students can also post anonymously. They're aware that they're in the community with other students. So it doesn't violate FERPA, and we're very conscious of that. And we make sure that students have the ownership of how they appear and how they participate in these spaces.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions here in the chat. Did you pilot with one course as a part of the change management strategy?
Yes. And I'll be honest that the piloting was done before I joined ASU. So I can't answer more specifics about that, but yes, it was piloted with one course before going more broadly.
I think we piloted with college algebra. Does that sound right?
I'm pretty confident that's what the pilot was. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had actually also, in full disclosure, we had tested this model with Arizona State in a different area of the organization prior to bringing it to ASU Online. So they pre-piloted it elsewhere. It worked. Then they introduced it to ASU Online in the college algebra space and then expanded out from there. And now it's actually being used in other subjects beyond math. The writing center, some IT and computer science classes, accounting. So sort of expanded out. But it's good to have a proof point, I think, that you can point to, and that probably also helps with just faculty adoption enthusiasm, I guess is the word I'd go for.
And we're going to jump ahead a couple of questions because it is in the same vein as pilots. So does Inscribe support pilots with free or reduced costs for a limited period of time?
We do pilots, and we do pilots for a limited period of time, like a semester is often, or 6 months is often a good period of time. We do adjust the pricing of the pilot to accommodate that shortened time frame.
The questions just keep coming in, so we're going to keep rolling with this two-way conversation. Katie, how is Inscribe different from Teams?
So I would say Inscribe is more a platform that would integrate with Teams. I'm not as familiar with Teams as I am with something like Slack, but in my experience, a platform like that is great for sort of transactional conversation. Almost use like a synchronous platform, even though I know it has asynchronous components. Whereas Inscribe is really designed to be a knowledge repository. So it's fully searchable. It's easy to find stuff. If something got asked 3 weeks ago and you didn't see it, and then you come in, it's really easy to still find that and get benefit from it. And then we have a lot of other components built into the product. So I won't get super deep into all of them, but we have some AI that helps you manage the priority of conversations. We deeply integrate with all the technology that you have on campus. A really robust analytics thing. So if you want to go deeper, reach out and I'll give you the whole rundown on all the sort of differentials between the two. But I think they would work more in collaboration versus one versus the other.
So we're going to stick with you for a second here, Katie. Have
Okay.
you ever had smaller schools pull together a knowledge base?
What an interesting question. We have not had a couple of schools partner up to do that, although the technology is absolutely designed to accommodate that. And we would love to see that use case come to fruition. So if you're a small school and you know another small school that would like to work with you, or a big school that wants to work with another big school, let us know, because the platform can definitely do that.
Awesome. So we're going to jump back to Daniel here. Daniel, in terms of moderating the community and how you handle inappropriate comments, how do you monitor and or approach public conversations that fall outside of university policy?
Yeah, great question, Ashley. This is always a challenge. I guess I can be fortunate to say that has rarely occurred, but that it's typically dealt with in what I would say is the standard way that it would be dealt with if it had happened in a discussion board inside the LMS Canvas. Someone notices it who's a part of the teaching team, or a student notices it and alerts someone, and that has the capacity of removing it or hiding it, making it private if it's a inappropriate comment. If the conversation is just that's not the appropriate space, it's always about like elevating it to the right person to have them deal with it appropriately. There's some maybe Katie, you could talk about Rosie, because I know there's some built-in auto moderation that can help with this too.
Yeah. So I'll preface by saying that Daniel's experience, I think, is very common, which is that you don't actually see inappropriate posts happen very often, if at all. But if they do, there's moderation tools built in. And then Rosie is the technology assistant that lives in our platform and helps kind of keep things scalable and positive. And one of the things that Rosie does is she runs every conversation through a sentiment API. So if the emotion of a post is very negative, like angry or frustrated, Rosie will proactively identify that and escalate it to the moderation team. So, and she also does some keyword matching. So if particular keywords ever appear in a post, she can capture that. Rosie will capture that as well. So that's just some, safeguards that we built into the product to help catch things when they happen. But again, it's very uncommon, I think, because students really view this as an extension of their educational professional space. They're unlikely to, and it's, although you can post anonymously, it's not truly anonymous. You can kind of see who posted that. So they know that they're representing themselves when they participate in the platform.
One last quick question, and then we'll get back into the presentation. How much time on average does a student spend in Alex each week?
Oh, and Alex.
Okay, so I was gonna try to pronounce this name. I'm gonna maybe get it wrong, but Sharini. Great question. I just happened to peek into the Alex. I saw your question and planned ahead. What I'm seeing for many of the courses at the institution level is about 5 hours a week on average of active time for each student, but I'm sure that would be different as I look at more granular data. That seems a little low, to be honest, for what I would expect. But I'm gonna not cite any more specific numbers at the moment. So follow up with me in email and I can have a different conversation with you there.
That's great. And I will say, I know we're focused on Alex in this conversation, but we also integrate with courseware products and homework products from other publishers as well. So if you're using a different tool, but you like this model, you like that idea, reach out, because it might be somebody we're already working with or could certainly build that integration with. I see more chatter, Danielle. Should I keep going or?
I'm muted, but that's it for now. So why don't we jump back into the presentation?
Okay, all right. No, that's great. Please keep your questions coming, because as I said, this is really about making sure that we answer the questions that you all have. So Daniel, if we can remember where we were. So I think we've touched on a lot of this, but I don't know if you just, and maybe goals isn't even the right title for this, as opposed to, these were some of the benefits that you saw of moving to this model.
Yeah, one of the things I don't think I've mentioned enough or at all maybe is the way that Inscribe has resources that we can build into it. So we can put in content that's, say, videos that we recorded, or just text and images on the page kind of thing, and that those can stand as a like repository that exists before a student even asks a question. And so that's a unique thing that's different than just like a discussion board that you would find, is that ability to have built-in content that over time you can continue to add to and refine. I think that's a really useful aspect, and it allows for students to find it more efficiently because of its integration with the topics that we have in Alex, and because of the integration with Canvas. So it makes it have a much more, it's more useful for the students to find those resources. Because as we know, our courses can be huge with all the different information we try to give to students. There's a ton of stuff that we can offer, and curating that can be a challenge. And this helps with that curation, because the students can control it themselves a bit.
Yeah.
And seeing trends in what the students are confused about week to week is another thing. You have insight across more sections. So that identifying key issues is, you can see sort of hot spots in what students are confused with, asking about, concerned with that week. Right.
And then maybe using that as like a feedback loop to the curriculum, or to drive the creation of new resources, for example.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think we do have a visual of that. So these are like small pieces of what the integrated experience looks like, but I'm gonna let you talk about this, but I'll just say, like on the left here, it's an example of a student launching into Inscribe directly. They were working on graphing a linear equation. They launched Inscribe. We knew they were working on that. So we've pre-filtered what's being presented back to them to just the resources and conversations that are relevant to that topic. So they're not having to like wade through they can search for their question if they want to, but the immediate thing we're going to show them is the stuff that's probably most relevant to helping them out. And then these are just some pictures. Anything else you want to touch on here?
So you can see in the ask a question rectangle, which is the lower right one, that there's some suggestions at the bottom. So as a student is asking a question about a topic, it doesn't have to know that the student doesn't have to name the specific topic. It's looking at keywords and offering, do you think any of these things that are already here might help? And you can a student can preview those things to see, do I need to ask my question, or is this already asked and answered and I just need to go see it and read it and potentially add to the thread in that question versus create a new thread.
Right.
And I think that's a really, really neat feature.
Yeah, we've heard, especially at ASU, the reduction in the number of duplicate questions that faculty are managing because of just pooling them or having Rosie make those recommendations. It can be up to an 80% reduction in the number of duplicate questions. So a lot of time back in your day is what we hear a lot from faculty and TAs when they have that. Danielle, I'm keeping an eye on the chat increment just to.
There's a question in regards to hiding posts that maybe aren't inappropriate, but that might give away answers. So if the knowledge-based repository goes back multiple terms, is there a way to temporarily hide the posts that aren't inappropriate, but give away answers that students shouldn't see yet?
Yes, so you can, you made an important point, which is that the communities can roll over term. Daniel, I don't believe the math team is doing that, right? You guys are starting new communities fresh each term, even though you're pooling across. You're reusing the resources that you've built, but you're kind of clearing out the conversations and starting fresh. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, that the resources we keep, but that the student posts, they are reset every semester.
Yeah. And not everyone does that. So some people do carry over. And so you can archive posts, you can hide them. You can delete stuff that's no longer relevant. So there's a couple of different ways to go about, I think, achieving the goal that individual's. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat, so I can't see the names of who's talking, but that question that addressed.
And one of the useful things that we've done, because I was concerned about losing the questions from semester to semester. So what we started to do was make like a FAQ, and that persists, so that we can see what were those like really hot spots, and we can then address those and again decrease the amount of new questions being asked, because we said, hey, here, these are the things that we see a lot of questions about. Here's the help for that. So we can continue to add to those FAQs and make the repeat questions go down semester to semester, as well as inside the semester.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. So you're getting like the best of both worlds in a way, like tapping into the knowledge generation, but also allowing for the new discovery or, the removal of stuff that's not relevant.
Exactly.
We have a question here in regards to the different types of use cases for Inscribe.
Yeah.
The question is specifically, can you use Inscribe for faculty and staff community building as well, or resource sharing?
Absolutely. So anytime you have a place where shared knowledge creation and participation would be beneficial, Inscribe can be used there. So we have a lot of folks that use it for faculty professional development and faculty to faculty support. We have communities that get used, outside of the classroom and other places like advising and coaching and even admissions. So that's definitely doable. I'm trying to think. I don't know that we have a faculty community at ASU right now, although I think they are using Inscribe to help people understand how to use Inscribe. So that's kind of a fun little meta activity.
Well, we have a partner in the chat here that has shared that they will be using it in their department soon. So thank you, Katie, for sharing that tidbit.
No more in the chat. Keep going.
There's a moderation question that just came in. So do you have someone that's just focused on maintaining this, and how much time would you estimate it takes to maintain it?
I'm assuming that's a question to me, Jennifer. I think that's it. I think I understand how to answer your question. So in terms of keeping the information relevant, in the math courses we have it always stays fairly relevant. There's not a lot of changing, stumbling over my words here. There's not been a huge change in curriculum yet that would then make the information that's in Inscribe not relevant anymore. So depending on how consistently the course stays semester to semester, I think that changes how often you need to worry about the information being relevant. But about once a year, we do an audit, is what I call it, and look for resources in Inscribe that we can prune, because you always are adding, but you need to think of a time to subtract, and what are the things to take out to keep it from becoming overwhelmed. And what that turns out to be is a wonderful time when in my experience, the student workers, the learning assistants that I work with, during like different breaks, they want to keep working, but there's no interacting with students to do. So that's a great time to do an audit, because they want to work and they have time available to work. And so we can go in and make those changes. So it doesn't become this tons of extra time for, say, me. And if I was going to estimate the time it takes, I would say not that much time, we can get a spreadsheet of what resources are there and look through them and basically look at the analytics and how many people use them and all of that and try to prioritize which ones we keep and which ones we would remove. I'm not going to be good at estimating how many minutes or hours that is.
And I'll just chime in to say, you know, at Arizona State, they have the learning assistants who are participating in the communities and helping to answer questions. That's not always the case. So a lot of our communities are managed directly by the faculty. And what they tell us is, although I'm spending an hour to an inscribe each week, I'm saving 3 or 4 times that in the amount of, like, instead of answering these questions in individual emails, which is what I was doing, now I'm answering them in this shared space. So I'm actually saving time in my day and in my week. So it's transferring the work into a place where that work becomes more efficient. And you don't necessarily need to hire a separate team to do that activity, would be, I guess, the experience of other partners as well. Okay, can we jump into some results, Danielle, or is there something else you want us to touch on?
Let's go for it.
Okay, so this is the the punchline we've all been waiting for. So let's talk about what happened. Oh, look, we're gonna.
Oh, that's always fun.
I know, I didn't realize that. Oops.
I didn't either.
Oh no, I screwed it up. Jeez Louise. Okay. So I think does this predate your time at ASU, Daniel, or were you there during the fall of 2020?
No, it predates me.
Okay. Do you want to talk about it?
Green arrows are good. Increases in success rates are good, is what I can say. And that, you know, with college mathematics, we already started at a pretty high success rate. So seeing it only go up by 1.6% may not seem like a lot, but we were already much higher than where college algebra was. And we've seen success rates continue to go up. Wasn't able to provide, I wasn't able to be confident about the data that I was providing at the time before the webinar today, unfortunately. Yeah. But we did see success, and we've continued to.
Yeah, so big increases in success rates, which we did study again in the following spring and saw, you know, similar results in the spring. I think, to your point, college math was already very high, so the increase is smaller, but not insignificant. And then behind the scenes, the other data that was shared with us around these two. So we're working on, you know, they haven't republished the data term over term for every year, but partly that's because the increases are remaining constant. And so, but part of the other data that was shared with us behind the scenes was a significant decrease in withdrawal rates in these courses as well. So, and that's always a concern, I think, because withdrawal can also mean withdrawal from the college generally. And then a big increase in the number of students receiving A grades. So it wasn't, and in that case, I think it was a 10% increase. So it wasn't just that more students were passing, but a huge number of students were passing, demonstrating a much higher competency and understanding of the material. So, you know, especially in first year math, where this course is such a gatekeeper to not just the 4-year degree, but to pursuing a degree in STEM, to pursuing those types of careers. This makes a real tangible difference for a huge number of students in that population. You want to talk a little bit about, again, just jump in and interrupt us, Danielle, if there's anything you want us to touch on. Want to talk a little bit about some of the activity that you're seeing in these spaces, Danielle?
Sure. Yeah, we have, there's really nice analytics to look at built into the platform. And then there's also great data exports that you can use to dig deeper if you want. And the activity that we see here, and you can see sort of typical student behavior is there's likely some due dates where you see those peaks and then valleys right after due dates. Right. So we see that typical sort of behavior of students in when they're active and when they're less active. But we have lots of people interacting in different ways. So you have a small portion of people that are the really active, I'm going to post questions a lot. And then you have, I want to say that's about like 2 or 3%. Then you have about 5 to 15% of the students are replying to those questions or engaging with those questions. And then a 70 to 80% are lurkers, is the term that people use in the online vernacular of they're there, but they're mostly just reading, but they're there. Like, that's the thing that's mostly important to me, is they're there, they're doing something, they're not there, to use a double negative. And so, like, when we look at the psychology of a human engaging in a online conversation space, the way the students are engaging here matches how it works. You're not going to get a huge majority of students being the big users that ask lots of questions. It's just not how it works. And that's the psychology of how humans engage, I think, because it matches what we see when you analyze other types of communities with humans online in conversation.
Right. And sort of layering over that, this desire for scalability. If somebody's asked a great question, and I always love to look at like the number of views that you guys get on your conversations and resources, 11,000 people viewing these, or 11,000 views, I should say, of these conversations. That's potentially 11,000 times that a student was helped by a question that somebody else asked, and they got an answer, or they got confidence, or they got something from that didn't require them to either post and get an answer or put themselves out there. So don't underestimate the power of the lurker population and the benefit that you're providing them, I always say.
Yeah, to me, sometimes when I talk with people, they look at, well, only 193 questions were asked that semester. Yeah, but look at how many times the answers were viewed and the conversation was viewed. And
Right.
that it's not about, you don't want 10,000 questions. That's not the point. The point is that we want the questions to be answered, and then to that conversation be useful to someone else next time.
Right.
And so that's what I think we can see here when we look at these analytics.
Yeah, I feel like a 10,000 question community maybe becomes a little unmanageable
pretty quickly.
I do have a question here.
Yeah.
So jumping back to the success outcomes, does the success rate mean that students earned a passing grade on the course overall?
Yeah, it's a B or C grade, correct.
Okay, and then Kitty, the next question is, does Inscribe have an app?
We do. So we have a mobile app. So the platform is mobile responsive, so you can use the web app on any device, no problem. But we also have a native app for iPhone and Android that you can download and put on your phone. And you can do pretty much everything from there. Search, ask questions, respond to other people, get notifications directly on your phone, home screen. So it's a really nice way to engage with the community and to keep track of what's going on in there.
Next question for Daniel. Are you requiring participation for a final grade?
Great question. I'll say affected 20% yes, 80% no. What that means is 4 of the 5 classes using Inscribe is not in any way a portion of their grade. And in 1 of the 5 classes, the students are encouraged to go post like an introductory, hello, I'm Dan and I live in Oregon kind of post. And that is a part of the like first week onboarding participation grade. So yes and no. But it's not, it's done mostly as this is a helpful community, go get help there, and there's not a grade attached to participation in the community.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to drop your contact information into the chat because I didn't get a chance to do that at the beginning, but I would just encourage everyone to get your questions in so that we can answer them live within the next 10 minutes.
Somebody raised their hand. Rachel raised her hand, but I can't like let her speak because I don't have access to the participant panel. I don't know if you do, Danielle or Rachel. If you just want to post your question in the chat, we would love to know what you're curious about. So I'm going to let you figure that out, Danielle.
Okay. Yeah.
If you can find her.
Rachel, you said?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll reach out. Thank you.
popped up on my screen. Okay, terrific. So these are some impressive numbers. This is obviously cumulative from the last now 2.5 years. So and across oh no, just in this Math 117 community, but I think we saw kind of a microcosm of that here for an individual semester, but you can start to see as you carry things term over term how that can really amplify. Any thoughts on this, Daniel?
I see 14,000 people plus that were helped. That's what I see. Those are the things that I like care about and focus on. And that there were 4,000 times that someone got help.
Yeah.
And then a huge number of times that initial question, someone being brave enough to ask that question, helped someone else.
Yeah.
In those huge views.
Yeah. Wonderful. And we did have some great feedback from faculty and students. I don't know if people can read these on their own, but any insights or so what I would use recommendations for people as they're talking to faculty about this that you think they could learn from your experience?
I'm sorry, did you ask me something? I was searching Rachel's research paper.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just gonna say whether you had any tips or tricks for how to talk to faculty about these spaces, or I don't know, any feedback you got from faculty that made you feel optimistic about the model.
Sure. I think I like to try and begin conversations with faculty by finding ways to help. Like, I am a faculty member. Currently, I don't have classes, but I identify as a faculty member. I am a mathematician and educator. And so I know how much work it is to teach effectively, and finding ways to help people teach effectively. That's how you can gain people. That's how you can get people into the conversation. And then once you're having a conversation about issues and how to resolve them and problems and solutions, that's my number one tip for how to have conversations with faculty, is identify with their work and how much effort it takes to be an educator, and look for ways to help them achieve their goal, which is to have people learn. That's the way to do it, if I was to summarize.
Very good. Did we find a solution for Rachel's
I am
question?
not familiar with the research, Rachel, unfortunately, but now I am. Lifelong learner over here.
I'll repost Rachel's question in the chat as well for everyone. And then we did have another question come in. Daniel, any tips or tricks for attracting student ambassadors to help champion the community to be moderators?
Well, that when you say to be moderators to become student workers, that's a follow-up question to you from me. But then one of the things that I've experienced in my 12 years of being an educator in higher ed is it's like a lightning strike when you find that student that's willing to all of a sudden talk to the whole class or community. So when you notice it, support it, elevate it, encourage it, tell them you appreciate it, because it is magic and it is not something that just is always happening. So when that happens, support it, elevate it, help that person feel appreciated, know that what they're doing, let them know that what they're doing is making a difference. Because it is. There's one student I remember in particular, one of my own classes, that did this, and it completely changed the entire class from day one. That's the best teaching experience I've ever had because of one student. So if you have that person, let them know they're special, let them know that what they're doing matters, and to have them keep doing it wherever they go. Because it's rare to find that person who, I think it has a little bit of like outgoing, extrovert as well as like bravery to like engage in a learning space in such a way, because learning spaces are intimidating often.
Yeah. That's
I
such
love this comment from Sasha in the chat. She says she agrees, and finding those super engaged folks feels almost like finding a unicorn.
Although I was going to say, I think it's a little contagious, because I think when you find those folks and you do encourage them and they keep kind of modeling that behavior, it gives courage to other members of your community to start engaging as well. So it kind of feeds on itself, which is really fun to see.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Well, I think we have a little bit of looking ahead. Okay. So anything you want to talk about, it's working. You guys have obviously put a lot of design thought into it and evolved it over the years, but anything critical that you want to talk about next steps?
Sure. So yeah, the improved resources, that was that sort of FAQ list that we mentioned, and also the sort of pruning and curating the resources we had year over year. And to me, it's recently, but in the scheme of things for UK, it's probably not that recent, but live sessions have become available. And so this is a way to advertise like a video conferencing meeting, or like a Google Meets or a Zoom or Teams meeting in an Inscribe post that can be advertised in advance. And you can like, one of the useful things is you can collect questions in advance in the like thread for this live session, so that the facilitator of the live session can come prepared to address those questions. It also creates a place to provide a summary of what happened during the session. And so it's been a really useful tool for the learning assistants to use. Even if there's not a huge number of students attending them synchronously, there are a large number of students looking at the recordings or seeing the summaries that are being put into those posts in Inscribe. So it's been a really great way of bringing that synchronous piece when most of the course is asynchronous, and providing that. Sometimes math, especially, you want to have a back and forth that's very quick with the back and forth with not much delay in between. And so these really allow for that conversation to happen, even if the students participating don't feel comfortable speaking, but they can chat more quickly back and forth and get like live, like whiteboard sharing from the learning assistant and things like that.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Well, first of all, Daniel, thank you so much for sharing that story. If there are any additional questions, please drop them in the chat. We definitely have a few minutes that we can still get to those and talk about it. I'm hugely appreciative to all the attendees today. Thank you for being so interactive and sharing your questions, your thoughts, your experiences with us, because that makes it obviously we believe that sharing ideas and being collaborative makes a better experience for everybody. So I really felt that way today. Dr. Rockwell, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I believe Danielle shared your information in the chat. Is that right, Danielle?
That is correct. I did. And I'm also going to share contact information for you as well, Katie, and us here in Inscribe, so that if anybody has any additional questions, since we are running out of time, please feel free to reach out to us.
So I know it's a busy time of year for everybody, but yes, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions that we didn't get answered here. If you want to go a little deeper on something that's specific to your institution, please reach out. Happy to have that conversation. I think we do have another webinar coming up next week. We're going to squeeze one more in before everybody disappears for the holiday. Similar concept, but a kind of a different approach. So again, thinking about how we create more just-in-time, scalable support for students, but in this case, looking at a lens through the tutoring center. So using Inscribe communities as a way to extend the reach of the tutoring center into the classroom and kind of across time and space. So we'll be joined at that webinar next week by Dr. Joel Galbraith from Brigham Young University, Idaho, and Sasha Flores from Rio Salado College. Should be a great event. Please join us. I'm sure we're dropping the registration link in the chat.
It is there. And Sasha has actually been on our webinar today and interacting in the chat. Yeah.
Sasha, thanks for being here, and I'm excited for our conversation next week as well. And with that, I think we are right at time. So again, thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.